Welcome to the Finding the Magic podcast, where books come alive. I'm Tricia Copeland, a fiction author and host of this show. If you love books, finding great reads, and hearing about the story behind the story directly from the authors, this is the place for you. Whether you like fantasy, science fiction, dystopian, or romance titles, I think you'll find something to love in my playlist. Listen in to discover something magical about a book or two today. Hi, Loz.
Hi there.
How are you?
I'm excellent, thank you. How are you?
I'm good. Did I pronounce your name correctly?
You did, yes, you did.
Okay, fun. So today we have Loz Cadman. Am I right about that?
Cadman, yeah.
Cadman. She is an author. She's written a vampire book, and I'm super excited to hear about it. I read the description, and this is like my favorite kind of book to read.
That's really
I'm a
sweet.
huge vampire fan, and the name of the book is Midnight Devotion. It sounds like an urban fantasy. Is that right?
I wouldn't say it's urban fantasy. I'd say it's like semi-modern. It takes place about 16 years ago, so like 2009, 2010.
Okay.
Yeah,
Fine. Well, jump in and tell us all about it.
Okay, so essentially it is about a group of vampires that are in a punk rock band, and it takes place during the emo era of like 2009, 2010, because during that period, you know, people were listening to bands like My Chemical Romance, Paramore, and all of that, and you had other people as well who were more into like One Direction. But I grew up more around that era, so that's why I'm more nostalgic. And so this group of vampires, like, they are living a restrictive life. Like, they can't achieve their dreams or aspirations because they're vampires. Like, you have characters that want to start a family, that once had a dream job, one couldn't finish university, and there's so many things that these vampires want to do, but because they're living a restricted life and having to hide from society that they're vampires, they can't really achieve that dream of being in a big band. So essentially they meet this human who works at a dead-end job in a pub down in Southampton, and they become acquainted with her, and they're like, could you maybe come on tour with us, and we could do with your help with maybe defeating the head vampire who lives up north. And it's essentially like action packed, it's very gritty, and there's a bit gore, and it's very like nostalgic for that kind of era. And there is also like descriptions of like them being performing in like very underground like venues and all that. One of the venues is actually based on a real place in Birmingham called the Asylum venue, which is where the story idea actually became like real. Like, it was where I planted a seed to bring the story to life when I attended a gig for a very small band called Salem. Because at the time I was with a friend and we went to see them because the lead singer of that band's also a lead singer for another band I really like called Creeper, who are partially inspired by this because they're very gothic. And so I was waiting around, waiting for like the main act. And because I didn't have like a phone charger or anything and I couldn't go on my phone, I thought I'd just think about the fact that we might be meeting the band afterwards. And I started thinking, because they sing about eternal love and vampirisms, I wonder if they are secretly vampires. And then the whole idea just came into this image. And I hadn't written anything in a long time because I used to write a lot as a kid, and then by the time I grew into an adult I kind of stopped because I failed my GCSE English twice and I kind of lost that confidence to write. And so as soon as the story came to be, by then I had read a lot more books, my English got better, and I ended up just like typing it all up on a Word document the very next day. And then by 3 months later the book had completely been done, but it took me a year and a half to edit it and polish it and set it out for the world. And it's coming up to its first anniversary on Sunday of when it was released, which is October 13th.
Oh, cool. Congratulations.
Thank you. We haven't quite met the sales quota I had hoped for, but we were very close.
Fun. Well, October 13th, I like that too. Was it Friday, October 13th?
It was Friday. It was actually Friday the 13th was the day it was released, because October 30th was when I went to see Salem at the Asylum in Birmingham. So it made sense to release it. And funny enough, the band Creeper, who are partially inspired by the book, released an album the very same day last year. So it was like, okay, because they announced it like like after I had announced I was going to release the book. I was like, that's just a big coinky dink.
Wow, that's giving me chills. That's super cool.
Yeah, and I did actually meet Creeper a month later at a Nottingham show, and I did give them a copy of the book as well. And they were like, wow, this is really amazing as well. So, it's really cool to see a band with a copy of my book. It's like the early edition where like there were a couple of errors, but it's been updated since. And there's another band as well called Esoterica. They're very small, who I'm quite close with as well. I communicate with them quite regularly. They were the very first people to get a copy of the book because I saw them a month earlier, and because they've been inspiring for me to write since I was a teenager, I thought they need to get a copy of the book as my way of saying thank you for your music.
Right, that's very cool. So dig into these vampires for me. So they were once human, I'm guessing, right?
Yeah, they
and
were.
How did they become vampires? How do you become vampires in your world?
In my world, you get bitten by a vampire, and obviously the venom is transformed into your blood system, gets into your heart, and then it kind of conquers your body. And you obviously you become like a walking corpse, essentially. So the thing with this vampires is that there's more lore into it on why they can't do certain things. Like in the book, it explains how they're very sensitive to natural UV lighting because the venom within them is very corrosive. So if it's exposed to heat, fire, sun, especially like high UV, it will burn up and corrosive the venom within them. So that's why they can't like go out in the sun. And there's a bit more aspect on the religious parts on why they can't get to churches or why crucifixes and holy water damages them. It's going to be a bit probably later in the series because this book's going to end up becoming like possibly 4 or 5 books long. I want it to be just the one, but it ended up now being 5. But these vampires also live a restricted life where once they turn into a vampire, they are sent to the big vampire council known as the Vampirium. They're like a group of vampires that are scattered across the world, and they monitor the vampire activities. Think of it as kind of like the Volturi from Twilight, but instead of it being in one place, it's scattered everywhere. And so their rule is like you are given 2 weeks to adjust to your life as a vampire. And if you do not do any like high crimes, you're sent to the Vampirium. So you are monitored of how you cope without having to cause such a scene. And they tell you the rules and regulations. And then they say, you're no longer allowed to be in your county or your state. You have to wait 100 years for your social circle to be completely wiped out from age and all that before you can go back in. So you're basically just exiled from your home. So that way, because people will assume, you're acting really strange as well.
Right.
Yeah, and these vampires can also do hypnotism. They can grow bat wings. They could turn into beasts known as behemoths when like they're really aggravated, and especially like they go into like a bloodlust mode when they're starving of blood as well. So that's why they've got to keep their blood monitored. They can have human blood or they can have animal blood. It really doesn't make a difference, just so long as they're getting that energy as well.
Wow, yeah, that's very cool that you create. I mean, it's somewhat like the vampire lore we've heard, but some spins on those too.
Yeah, because I want it to be a bit more unique, because like it's not easy when something's been done 100 times and you're trying to do something a bit different. And I wanted it to be a bit more grittier and a bit more lore focused. So it was tricky for me to write about a band whilst also writing about a lore based on a mythology and making it different.
Right. Yeah. No, it sounds like you did a great job. I'm definitely getting the book. It's going to be my weekend read.
Yay.
So, and these vampires are immortal, correct?
Pretty much, yeah. They can live up forever, pretty much, because obviously, like, their bodies can't change, their mind stays the same, like, their hair can't grow, their body can't, like, adjust to, like, grow for anything.
Okay. And it sounds like the plot line is that there's a possibility that they can stop being a vampire, right?
Pretty much, yeah. And they have to go through trials and tribulations and like drama and conflicts and revelations along the way on the tour. Think of it as like the hero's journey, but instead you're going on a tour with vampires.
I want to be on this tour. How can I live in this
book? Yeah. Well, it's pretty much like the same as reality, except there's a secret vampire like living in there. Because I've always enjoyed like reality with secret like world bending aspects that people don't know about. That's always been my favorite thing, like whether it's from books or video games or movies. I've always enjoyed like a secret aspect of reality, because reality always bored me, and I was like, I want it to be more unique and interesting.
Fun. And what other vampire books have you read, or which ones are your favorites?
So I've read the Twilight books, and I'll wholeheartedly admit they do have a place in my heart because I grew up with them. And while they're not perfect, I have nostalgia for those books. So, and this year I read a really good vampire book from CJ Tudor called The Gathering, which is basically about a cop in Alaska who's investigating vampire activity and a murder. And obviously this little town up in Alaska where it's all snowed in, it's around Christmas time. They know that vampires exist and that there's a bit more to it about like the vampire group trying to do like a truce or something with the humans. So obviously someone's trying to jeopardize that. So that was probably one of the best books I've read this year.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and I'm also going through the Vampire Diaries for the first time on my Kindle, because like they've doing them for like 99 pence at the moment. So I've done 2.5 books so far, but so far like I do enjoy them, but it's not something I'm like very invested in. But I do know that the CW series was really popular like 14 years ago, and I never really watched it. But like I
Oh,
have seen
okay.
videos of people saying like it kind of went downhill for a while. But I know for a fact the books are better.
Yeah, and the books are completely different than the series. Like if you want, I mean, it's the same characters, but it's completely like I really love the series, and so I picked up the books. And while I like the books as well as the series, they're completely different. Like they have the similar characters, but the plot lines don't line up at all.
No, that would be my biggest fear if hypothetically if my book ever became a series, is like they completely go off the rails of what the book's about and what the plots are, and they don't follow the formulas. That would be my biggest fear.
Right. Yeah. And but I guess you kind of give away your rights at some point. I don't know how that works, but yeah.
Yeah, that's the big dream if it became mainstream,
Yeah.
which, I would have a long way to go to do that.
Fun. So how do you see other books in the series going?
With this one, well, at the moment, I've nearly finished editing book 2. And while it was quite difficult to live up to the hype of what the first one was, it kind of is going to be more vampire lore focused and music focused. But I have an idea how book 3 is going to go, and it will be a lot more music driven than it is vampire lore, because like book 2 is going to go into that direction where we're learning more about like other vampire societies and what another group of possibly other supernatural creatures may exist and how they were made. And like book 4 and book 5, or it could just end up being what book 4, I do not know. Like I have some ideas, but I do not know if it's going to work. It's one of those things where it's like I have the idea in my head and it may like change gradually over time. Like the first book went through 2 different endings because my sister read it and told me you should do this because it has more impact. And she was right in doing so, because I wanted it to be just one book and it had too much of a happy ending. And I thought, you know what, she's right. I could make this maybe a bit more grittier, a bit more sad, but it's also not going to be continuing it. And it's kind of expanded the world. It's kind of like I've planted a simple seed and now it's growing into a massive tree rather than a plant.
Fine. Yeah, it's hard sometimes to write cliffhangers, but sometimes they can be fun too, because that leaves it to the reader interpretation, or what, and another book, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like I've learned recently as well is that your sequels don't necessarily have to be longer or better than your first. Because I recently started the Shadowhunter series because I found them in the charity shop, and I found that their width of the books go smaller than bigger than smaller than bigger. So that kind of gave me that idea that maybe the next book may feel a bit shorter, but it doesn't have to necessarily be perfect, just so long as people are somewhat engaged.
Yeah, I think as long as you wrap up a story, you have a beginning, middle, end, and you wrap up a story, it doesn't like I was talking to an author and she was like, well, a novel's like 50,000 words. I'm like, oh no. Like, I
No.
mean, a novel to me is like 80, 90, 100 maybe.
Yeah, like Midnight Devotion is roughly about 130,000 words
Wow.
plus. Yeah, it's like 440 pages. So that's roughly almost as long as Twilight, the first book, is.
Right, yeah. So that is long for a book. So, but in my series, I do that. Like I'll have a longer book, a shorter book, a long book. Yeah, and
Yeah.
it's just how it works. Whatever, the kind of the story for that part of the series.
Yeah, and especially because like they're touring 5 cities, so obviously something's going to happen, and then you've got the big fight at the end, possibly. So in the next book, they're not going to be doing that. They're going to be doing something completely different. So they like doing the ending. I felt like it kind of stopped the hero's journey dynamic and kind of went in a different direction. But I still hope the formula works. But we'll have to see what people think when that comes around. Hopefully next year it will be out by then.
Oh, fun. Yeah, it's kind of reminding me. Have you read the House of Night series?
I haven't, no.
I think
That
it's
might be on my.
Kristen and PC Cast, where basically if you get this like mark on, it's like a like half moon or quarter moon or something. If you get this mark, then you've been marked to become a vampire, and it's usually when you're in high school. So then you have to go to a school to learn how to be a vampire. And I think there are 12 or 13 books in the series. I
Oh
mean,
gosh.
yeah, I read through 12, and sometimes on those series that are so long, at the
Yeah.
end it kind of goes down, but I really like them, and they have a lot of different characters in their books too, so that might be enough. They're pretty old, so those would be in a 3
Yeah.
or 4 too.
Yeah. Well, I haven't started to read older books as well. Like, I'm not restricted. Like, I'm partially restricted on what I read, but like, I'll still give things a try, because like, I read The 3 Body Problems this year, even though I'm not a sci-fi person. And it was one of the easiest books I've ever read that's in the genre of sci-fi. Because my fiance was telling me that I needed to read it so we could watch the series. And I was like, you know
Yeah.
what? This book is actually not that bad of a read. And I thought it was going to be very complex. Like sci-fi is like that one genre I wish I was really into, but it's way too complex for my little brain. I'm more into like fantasy and world-bending stuff.
Well, fun. Well, thank you so much for being here. Tell everyone where we can find you.
Okay, so you can find me on Facebook of Loz Cadman -author page. I'm on Instagram at cherry_rabbit_Loz. And you can find me on Twitter or X or whatever you want to call it at Loz Cadman. And I'm also on TikTok as at Loz Cadman Books.
Fun. Well, I'm so glad you were here, and we will look for you next year when you release your next book.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me as well.
Bye.
Bye.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Finding the Magic podcast. I'm your host, author and podcaster Tricia Copeland, and I love getting behind the scenes. If you like the podcast, make sure to subscribe and stop in each week to discover new authors and books. Thanks for listening, and until next time, keep finding the magic.